A Boy and the Pirate Prince, Book 1, written by Matthew Korak. Episode 2, The Farm. 3. Bijan awoke to the sound of birds chittering their morning prayers to the sun. It was dark out, though he could see the pre-dawn light creeping through the window's closed shutters. He rolled over on his back, the bed of hay rustling as he moved, and stared up at the thatched roof of the hut, listening to the gentle breathing of his siblings. Reaching underneath his pillow, he pulled out a small clay figurine. Though he could not see it in the dark, he knew exactly what it looked like. A warrior painted in faded gold and blue, holding a curved blade and shield at the ready. Bijan held it close and ran his finger over the figurine's smooth edges, worn down by years of play. He daydreamed for a moment, a dream of what it would feel like to hold a sword, to slash it through the air. He imagined fighting off those who had hurt his family, his mother, his father, his brothers and sisters. He imagined how his father would clap him on the back and rejoice in pride at his warrior son. He imagined his mother hugging him and crying, not her wonted tears of pain, but tears of joy. He imagined the surfeit bounty he would find and bring home, his brothers and sisters never going hungry again. He fantasized and mused, but only for a moment. Putting his figurine back, Bijan arose quietly, careful not to wake his younger siblings. Best to let them sleep, Bijan lovingly thought. Today will be a hot, hard day. Let them enjoy their dreams for a moment longer. Though darkness was the hut, Bijan could sense his way around the shanty blind, for it was the only shanty he had ever known. He moved through the black, a silent ghost, retrieving his attire that hung from a peg in the worn wooden wall. Slipping his pants, tunic, and sandals on, he quietly opened the door and exited, emerging from the dark into the burgeoning light. The full moon was still high in the sky, and to the east, the horizon burned blue. Save for the birds' incantations, the world held its breath, the calm before the sun emerged to scorch the world with its cruel gaze. Steam puffed from Bijan's mouth in long gouts, the morning chill still holding tight to the air and land. It pierced his skin and sent him shivering. Rubbing his arms, Bijan set to the morning. The land was full of shadows, objects unrecognizable save for Bijan's knowledge of them. The hut he and his siblings slept in, the sandstone farmhouse where the family gathered, the wooden stables, the sundry hovel, the distant well made of stone, the timber fences. The blue skyline was made from rolling hills and craggy outcrops, all at great distance and surrounding the flat, dry landscape. Though he could not see it in the dim light, Bijan knew what was out there. Flat, rocky terrain, pitted with stones that jutted from the earth, lined by shrubbery and root grass. He walked toward the sundry shed, passing underneath the farm's lone pomegranate tree. Its thinning branches clawed at him as he went, grabbing at his dark hair and worn clothing. The tree was a remnant of a better time, the last survivor of the memory of what was once a proud farm, or so his father had told him. He reached up and grabbed one of the branches and snapped it off cleanly, a 2-foot piece of thin wood, now christened as a weapon. He continued forward, swinging the branch in wide arcs, fighting off invisible foes. The sundry hut was as dilapidated as the farm, if not more. A collection of planks tied and bound together by old rope, standing 5 feet tall, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet deep. Even at his age, Bijan had to bend at the neck to get through the entry, barred by a heavy wool blanket hanging from the shack's frame. He struck at the blanket with his weapon once before setting the branch down. Pushing the wool aside, he stepped in. Inside, it reeked of earth and animal, a stark difference from the sterile desert outside. Sightless, Bijan grabbed what he needed, his deep memory of the hovel guiding his hands. Buckets, 4 in total, and a thick 6-foot piece of wood. He stepped outside, and using the bucket's rope handles, looped 2 to each end of the heavy stick, hoisting the contraption across his shoulders. Satisfied with the balance, Bijan walked towards the well. The well was far from the sundry host, 300 paces. As he walked, his shoulders began to ache, though not as bad as they had when he first was given watering as his charge years ago. And soon enough, they would be aching even more once the buckets were full. His father had always said he had strong shoulders for his age, and should be thanking the God above that he has been given a chance to make them stronger. Bijan remembered the first days of watering and how much he had hurt. The pole weighed down by 4 full buckets, digging furrows into his shoulders. One day, shortly after he had been given the responsibility to water the farm, Bijan had decided to only carry 2 buckets at a time. Though it took longer to complete his watering chores, 2 buckets hurt much less than 4. When his father saw this, he confronted Bijan. "Is there a reason my son is taking so long to water his charge?" Bijan was at the pomegranate tree, dumping a bucket of water into the soil surrounding the tree's trunk, when his father challenged him. "I would have expected you to be finished. Have you been at play instead of seeing to your duties?" Bijan had shook his head, upset at the notion he was playing and not working. "No, father, I have been working." Bijan pointed to the wet earth where he had been pouring water. "See?" His father looked at the 2 buckets. "Why are there only 2 buckets here instead of 4? "When all 4 are filled, they are too heavy to carry at once," Bijan explained. Bijan's father shook his head. "I instructed you to carry 4 at a time." "But father, they hurt my shoulders and my neck." His father had struck him across the face, the back of an open hand, drawing blood. The blow was not hard, but still sent Bijan tumbling back on his rear, dust puffing up at the impact. Bijan stared up at his father, tears welling at the edges of his dark eyes. The clout had surprised Bijan more than hurt him, but even more surprising was his father's face. It was not a face of anger or rage, nor was it a face of disappointment or sorrow. It was flat and contained no judgment, lined with wrinkles of time, tan skin from toil in the sun, brown hair graying at the edges, and black, flinty eyes twinkling. "I will only tell you this once, as you are going to be a man one day. The world is filled with those who pray for a lighter load. Those men are weak, for the less you carry, the less you can carry. You, my son, should pray for stronger shoulders." His father paused and stretched out his hand, inviting his son to take it. And the only way to have stronger shoulders is to carry more. Bijan had loved his father more than anything at that moment, when he had taken his father's hand. His father pulled him to his feet, spun Bijan around, and dusted him off with 2 downward swipes of a large hand. With no word spoken, Bijan's father had walked away as if nothing happened, about his daily burdens. His father had been right. 4 buckets was impossibly hard at first, but got easier over time. It still strained him to carry the fully filled water carrier, but now he could do it straight through, taking no breaks. Being strong was a good thing, Bijan supposed, a necessity to being a great warrior, and that thought pleased him. Arriving at the well, Bijan unloaded his carrier. A wooden trestle stood over the sandstone waterhole, and on the ground next to it was a wooden bucket with 50 feet of rope. Bijan picked it up and threw the bucket over the trestle and lowered it slowly into the abyss. He dropped it until he felt the rope go slack. Though he couldn't see, he knew the bucket was now touching water. He jiggled the rope, waiting for the slack to slowly disappear as water entered the bucket. He held the rope steady until the weight felt right, until it felt full. Satisfied, he pulled up the vessel. The horizon was turning red. the dark slowly filtering out of the world as Bijan pulled the bucket up to the well's edge. His stomach began to growl its usual morning protest, hungry for sustenance. Bijan knew it would be some time before he had a chance to quell it. He cupped his hands and dipped them in the bucket. Leaning over the wooden vessel to avoid waste, he brought his lips to his hands and drank. The water was cold and vaguely smelled of rotten eggs, its taste tinted with mineral. When you are hungry, his father had once told him, drink water to fill your belly. Bijan did just that and drank his fill, quenching his stomach's protests, if for only a moment. He turned to filling the remainder of his buckets and carried on towards the stable. It was a long trek to the stable, where empty water troughs waited, large wooden logs that were carved out and oiled. They lay on the ground, flush with the exterior of the stables, next to an old, broken wagon. Bijan walked cautiously, careful not to slosh any water out, stopping only to open the gate of the fence that surrounded the stables. As he passed through, he could see the stable, less now a shadow and more tangible in the dawning light. Unlike the sundry, it was well made, straight boards and imported timber, tall, long, and wide. Like the pomegranate tree, it was a vestige of better times, when Bijan's father was a boy himself. Like most things built when times were good, it had stood the test of time and weathered the environment well. Bijan sidled up to the troughs and stable, lifting the water carrier from his shoulders and gingerly placing it on the dirt. Here he could smell the sweat and manure emanating off the structure and could hear the animals inside. The mules nickered, having heard the gate open, knowing that they would soon be released from their nightly prison. Bijan also heard the bleating of the goats, 32 all crying in unison. He smiled, grabbed the first bucket, and began pouring the water into the trough. A strange notion came over Bijan at that moment, a vague feeling of muted lightning that ran up his spine. He stopped pouring, stood up straight, and looked east. The horizon was growing redder by the heartbeat. Squinting his eyes, he scanned the landscape, the color of the light brown sand becoming visible as the sun pushed towards the edge of the sky. He could see the fences, the pomegranate tree, and the rocky, flat land beyond. The feeling in his spine intensified. He felt the presence of something, the same way he could sense the presence of his siblings when they were down for the night, each curled up underneath a blanket, invisible in the dark. Something was watching him. Bijan put the bucket down and walked towards the burning atmosphere on the horizon. The early morning light played tricks on the eyes, and many times one would see something that was not there, or misinterpret something that was there as the wrong thing. But Bijan could swear he saw something in the desert, a small black shape 50 paces beyond the well. Stopping at the fence, Bijan stared at the form. Though he couldn't be certain, it was beginning to look like a wolf. "Why are you not at your duties, my son?" Bijan turned to see his father standing behind him, tall and lean. He was wearing a pair of rough woolen pants and a dark linen tunic, stained from sweat and toil. In his hands he held 2 clay jugs. 2 of Bijan's brothers were with his father, little ducklings following their patriarch. They too were dressed in wool and linen, each carrying a clay jug that made their small frames look even smaller. "There is something out there, father," Bijan said, turning back towards the black figure. He pointed. "Look past the well. Do you see?" His father grunted. "I do. Pay it no mind. Be about your chores." "I think it might be a wolf." "A single wolf does not concern us," his father said. "It will be of no danger to the mules and pose no threat to the goats as long as we keep a watchful eye. Get back to your chores lest you miss the morning meal." He turned towards the stable, the 2 brothers following. "Papa, I want to see the wolf," one of his siblings said, a boy named Hamed, no more than 6 years old, short, dark, and skinny. His father ignored the boy. As he walked away, he parted one last token to Bijan. It is good of you to be watchful, but your mind wanders too much. Do not let it get distracted by things that make no matter. Hamid repeated his request, and again his father ignored it. They disappeared into the stable. Bijan looked back towards the dark figure, wanting to see it in greater detail, understand it, emulate it. What would it be like to wander the land, no chores, no duties, free? Bijan thought. He probably would never know. He sighed glumly and returned to his work. The rest of the morning was uneventful. It took Bijan 4 trips to fill the water troughs and 2 trips to water the pomegranate tree. While carrying his load, he looked towards the east whenever possible to see if he could spy the dark figure. He did not see it again. By the time he was finished, the sun was well above the horizon, and he had returned his carrying contraption back to the sundry. He went to the stables and entered. The vague smell of horse shit and animals that surrounded the stables became sharp upon passing its doors. On either side of the building were pens and stalls, partitioning off the mules from the goats. As they did every morning, the mules stamped and snuffed, hopping up and down on their powerful legs. He walked towards their stall gates, passing one of his siblings who had a clay crock filled with goat's milk. He, Hamed, and his father had finished milking the goats, and this jug being carried was the last of it. The small child was alone. Hamed and his father were already gone, most likely back at the homestead. "Are you finished?" Bijan asked the small child, his brother of 4 named Hasht. "Yar," Hasht said. He stopped at the stable door, struggling to open it, the jug beginning to slip. Bijan jumped to his brother's side and grabbed the pitcher, steadying it. He opened the door for Hasht and resituated the container in his brother's arms. "Be more careful, brother," Bijan sighed. "Papa would be very angry with you if you were to spill." He held the door open as his brother toddled through and followed him to the stable fence. "Where is Hamed? Why is he not helping you?" Hasht was focused intently on his charge and could only muster, "Father said no." When they reached the fence gate, Bijan opened it for his brother and let him through. "Heed me, be careful, be slow, do not spill, or Papa will show you his wrath." Hasht grunted acknowledgement and tottered off towards the family homestead. Bijan watched for a moment, considering going and helping his brother. "If father sees me helping," Bijan thought, "he will punish me for neglecting my duties, and punish Hasht for being weak." He decided against it and went back to releasing the animals. Mules first, goats second. That was the order of things. Not because the mules were more important than the goats. Mules were sure-footed and steady in disposition, but the first morning dash to water would best be done without a herd of ornery goats in the way. Better to get the mules to the water first and have the goats crowd in around. And so he did just that. Inside the stables, Bijan went to the wooden gate of the mule's stall. The dirt floor was covered in a thick layer of loose sand, spotted with piles of manure and half-dried cakes of urine. Both mules' large heads craned over the stall's boundary, and Bijan rubbed their jowls while speaking to them gently. Their eyes were full of intent, the desire to stretch their legs, to feel fresh air. "You mules must hate it here," Bijan soothed. They didn't have names. His father refused to name them or let them be named. "These are beasts, nothing more," his father had said. "They were put here to work and to die. Naming them only gets in the way of their purpose." So Bijan went to calling them Black and Brown, the color of their coats. Black nodded its head and pushed its nose into Bijan's neck, thick and hot air pouring from its nostrils. Bijan laughed. All right, I'm going." He opened the stall and walked out of the stables, the 2 mules following. Once outside, They trotted past him to the troughs, lowering their heads to drink deep. Bijan went back into the stall and did the same for the goats. They scurried out, racing for a spot at the trough. Once the mules were watered, Bijan went to the fence gate and made a click-click with his tongue. Black and brown raised their heads from the trough in unison and looked at Bijan, ears perked forward, dark eyes fixed. "To me, you damn mules," he called. Without hesitation, they turned and pranced to their warden. "You're excited, aren't you?" Bijan told them as they approached. As big and smelly as they were magnificent to the boy. The black reached him first, aggressively pushing Bijan with his nose. It was ready to run, to loose its demons into the earth below. "If I were you, I would run until the sun went down. I would run until I didn't know where I was, and then I would keep going the next day over and over again." The brown was next to Bijan now, putting its nose close to Bijan's face, staring at him. "You stupid mules, you make no sense. Every morning you can't wait to leave, to get out there where there is nothing to stop you, no fences to get in the way, and every evening you come back." The mules did not answer, only looked at him with black eyes. Bijan opened the gate, herding them through, using a free foot to keep a stray goat from escaping. "Go, before I change my mind." They obeyed, slipping through the open gate and out into freedom. He watched them run towards the horizon, hooves beating the ground into clouds that marked their passage. He envied them, and watching them roam free only reminded Bijan of his lot, a farm boy with no future. He closed the gate, kicking a pebble in frustration, and thought of his warrior figurine. The sun was climbing a cloudless sky, turning the ether from red to orange and threatening to become blue. Underneath the changing vista, Bijan conducted the rest of his morning affairs. The stalls were cleaned of manure and urine. As he was finishing putting the last of the manure into a cart with a wooden pitchfork, he heard his mother calling out to him, announcing it was time to break his fast. His stomach heard the call and grunted at Bijan. He put down the pitchfork, patted his gut, and jogged across the farm to the homestead. The farmhouse where his mother and father dwelled was made of brick, clay, sandstone, and wood. Years of sun and wind had burnished the exterior, to where it looked more made by nature than made by man. It was white where the sandstone existed, copper brown where the brick and clay stood. Its entrance was made of wood planks, tightly connected with crossbeams and copper studs. It stood facing east, its small windows peering towards the sun. It was the place Bijan was born, where he was raised, where he slept until he was old enough to live in the wooden hut. It was where he learned to talk, count, and write his name. It was where his father broke bread, and where his mother told him tales of heroes and villains, great kingdoms and fearsome monsters. It was his home, the only home he had ever known, and maybe ever would. "Bijan, my little hero," his mother called to him from the home entrance. She was a tall woman, still taller than Bijan, and was thick around the hips and breasts. Her dark hair was pulled back, hidden underneath a scarf that was tied at the neck. She wore a worn dress of cream wool that contrasted with her olive skin and green eyes. "Your brothers and sisters are ready to eat and are waiting on you." "I know, Mother," Bijan said as he reached the door, his attention momentarily drawn to a curiosity. He noticed a strange wet puddle in the dirt by the door, but did not have time to think more of it. He was late. He tried to slip past her, but she grabbed both of his hands at the wrist. "You grow every day. I won't be able to call you little hero anymore." She shifted her grip to his hands and squeezed. "We need to feed you more, to help you grow more." That was her custom, always discussing what should be. More food, more water, more leisure time. And as righteous as she may be, Bijan knew not to agree with her, else she'd fall into melancholy, which was always followed by tears. "I eat enough, Mother. Father provides." She pulled him in close and hugged him before gently pushing back and looking into his eyes. She was smiling. Bijan smiled back with a forced grin. As any mother is wont, she was intuitive to her firstborn, an instinct built over years of watching, preening, loving, and protecting. "Why are you sad?" she asked. Bijan let out a small snort, his smile growing sincere, a smile born from the understanding that another truly had affection for him. It was a smile of appreciation. "I am not sad." She lightly slapped his hand. "Tzuk, Bijan, I did not raise you to be a liar. You cannot hide anything from me so long as I can see your face or hear your voice. I am your mother." She smoothed his tunic with both hands. "You were daydreaming, weren't you? What flights of fancy were in your head this morning?" He habitually started his deception. "No, my mind was on my duty." "Bijan, no lies," she said. "You can't lie to me." She still smiled. He shook his head. How this woman always seemed to be able to read his thoughts, Bijan could not guess. "How did you know?" he asked. "Magic," she said, and pinched his side. Bijan struggled to get away, but she grabbed him, her pinches becoming tickles. Her fingers conjured an intense urge to shout and laugh. He tried to hold it in, but could not contain the laughter that came spouting uncontrollably from his mouth. "Yield, I yield," he said through chortling fits, and she obeyed. Regaining composure, he could see she still wanted her answer, her emerald eyes holding him in place, pulling the truth from him. "I was a swordsman, fighting off invaders." He showed her his right hand and clenched his fist. "I had a sword. Well, it was really a branch from our tree, but I pretended it was a sword. And I thought how I would fight off the invaders, take their gold, and then we could leave this place, all of us." His mother raised an eyebrow, an amused look spreading on her face. "Oh my, I worry about invaders too, come to steal all our precious belongings. The hidden gold, the treasure chests buried behind the stables, the—" Bijan's face began to burn and she stopped, seeing the embarrassed look forming on him. "But it does comfort me knowing you are here to help protect our land." She hugged him again. "Why does the thought of swordplay make you sad?" Bijan's answer was immediate. "It doesn't make me sad. I like thinking of the warrior. I want to be strong like the warrior. I want to swing a sword and protect the ones I love. That is what warriors are supposed to do." Bijan paused, thinking of how to say what he felt. "I am sad because of the mules. They hate the stables, I can tell. They are excited to go outside, to get away from the stables. Every day I open the gate and every day they leave. Every day they are excited to run. We don't stop them. They could leave and never come back. But every day, they return. They hate the stables, so why do they come back?" Bijan frowned. No, that wasn't the right question. He bit his lip and squinted, looking deeper into himself. What was he really asking? Why do they reject freedom? His mother looked at him, a warm light of admiration and love issuing from her. Bijan could almost feel it, an energy wrapping itself around him, a feeling of safety that only a mother could give a child. "My sweet, sweet Bijan, how is it God above could have granted me such a perfect son? How is it that one so young could speak with such wisdom?" She cupped Bijan's face in her hands. "Some creatures are not born for freedom. The mules are such creatures. They are like children who run and play, imagine the world beyond, and crave to leave their homes behind. And then they become hungry and tired, and crave nothing more than the safety of their parents." Bijan looked up at his mother, a crestfallen look growing on his face. "But that sounds like me." "No, she said gently. That's not you at all. I predict great things for you. This farm is too small for one such as yourself. From within the homestead, Bijan's father called, demanding everyone to come to the table. Come, wash up and eat. She pointed to a large clay bowl of water sitting on a short pedestal adjacent to the door. Quickly, before your father becomes upset. She went inside and Bijan bent over the water, washing his hands and face. He removed his sandals and washed his feet as well. You will be clean before entering this place, his father had told him years ago when he had grown old enough to spend his days working. Your toils belong out here, not with your food. Hands, face, and feet washed, he stepped through the door. Bijan walked the 3 steps down from the entry to the main room, the warmth of the home embracing his body. The hard-packed floor was covered with a hodgepodge of worn rugs. The same type of rugs were also hung from the walls, faded reds and golds and emeralds, the only color to the otherwise sterile abode. The ceiling was 7 feet tall and flat, crisscrossed with long wooden poles that supported a thatched roof. The eastern sun shone in through the small windows that were carved in the walls and provided enough light to illuminate the large gathering place. Against the walls of the house were various wooden tables in various degrees of wear. A large brick stove was built into the far wall and was still burning from this morning's meal preparation. And in the center of the room was the family table. Have a seat, my son, his father said from the head of the rectangular table, well-oiled and heavy in build. We would have already started had you been more prompt in your morning chores. The table was long and narrow, dark and sturdy. Lining the table were 10 chairs, and of those 10 chairs, 7 were occupied. His father at the head, mother to his side, and Bijan's 5 siblings, 2 brothers and 3 sisters in total. Please excuse my delay, father. I ask your forgiveness. Bijan sat down at the table, next to one of his sisters, the second oldest named Farzaneh. He looked down the table, his brothers and sisters sitting patiently, staring at their empty plates. He looked at the 2 empty chairs, each with an empty plate and empty cup placed before them. You are excused, his father said. He folded his hands together in front of his face and leaned forward over the table. The rest of the family followed suit. We pray. Words were spoken and repeated, words that Bijan knew by heart, but he did not know if he believed them. Thank you, Father, for the bounty you have provided us. Bijan raised his head as he repeated the words, peeking at the bounty. In the center of the table, a single loaf of bread, hardly the size of 2 of his father's fists, sat steaming. Next to it, a clay bowl scarcely filled with boiled and mashed beans, mixed with creme. 2 jugs of goat's milk sat next to the fare, ready to be poured into the clay cups that sat in front of each plate. Thank you, Father, for the life you give us and the nourishment to grow old. Bijan looked to his left, away from his father, away from the siblings, away from his mother at the 2 empty chairs. Chairs that once would have seated a brother and sister. They would have, should have, been here this morning, bowing their heads, praying, showing thankfulness and humbleness. But they were dead now. Dead from starvation and consumption. Dead because there were too many mouths to feed and not enough food to share. Thank you, Father, for the family that protects us. Bijan turned to look at his mother, holding her newborn, his baby brother, his 6th living sibling, close to her chest. Her head was bowed, and she smiled as she prayed. One wouldn't think it to look at her, but she was melancholy by nature. She would never allow her children to know this truth, but Bijan knew. He had heard the crying when she thought she was alone, when she believed she had total solitude. Thank you, Father, for the wisdom to know when to act and when to tarry. Bijan looked at his father, a man he adored and loved, a man who Bijan lately began to doubt. He dare not verbalize those apprehensions for fear of his father's wrath. But he questioned him in his thoughts in twilight, when he lay abed praying for sleep. And thank you, Father, for another day. Amen. The family raised their heads in unison, no words spoken. All looked to the head of the table, awaiting the patriarch's command. Bijan's infant brother began to fuss, short squeals and cries mixed with snorts of spittle. The father looked to the mother, waiting for her to address the interruption. Obedience was needed, for the morning tradition required silence. Bijan's mother pulled out a heavy breast and silenced her newborn, the cries turning to sucking and breathing. She rocked the boy infant, cooing lightly in his ear. Satisfied he would not be interrupted, Bijan's father began his morning doctrine. Today is an important day. There is much to be done. He looked at his eldest son. Bijan, you and I will tend the herd. Bijan nodded. Yes, father. Farzaneh. He turned to Bijan's sister, waiting for her acknowledgement. She gave it to him. You will take Shabnab. He nodded to his daughter of 7. And Hamed. See to the stables and tend to the bean crop. You will also see that your mother always has fresh water. Yes, father, said Farzina. His father looked to Asal, Bijan's sister of 9. Asal, you will take Hasht and see to the homestead. Clean it. And when you are done cleaning, see to your mother. If she needs nothing, help your siblings. Asal voiced her consent. Very well, the father said. Farzaneh and Asal, you may now serve the family. The 2 girls stood and went about their duties. Farzaneh cutting the bread into equal slices, each a size no thicker than their father's thumb. While she was cutting and serving each member a single slice, Asal went from plate to plate, scooping a spoonful of the bean mash onto the receiving clay platters. As the girls worked, the rest of the siblings began to speak the prattle of children. Small teases, laughing, sticking a tongue out. The mother rocked her child at the breast, and the father looked on at his brood. No one ate. With the food served, the 2 girls turned to the milk, each grabbing a jug. As before, the girls went from one member to the next, filling their respective cups to the brim. If there was one thing the family had abundance of, it was goat milk and would be the only food they were allowed seconds of. Through the low din of familial banter, Bijan's father spoke. No milk for Hasht. Asal paused. She was holding the clay jug in 2 hands and was beginning to tip it and pour the contents into Hasht's mug. The room went silent. Hasht hung his head. Asal gave the patriarch a soft, "Yes, father," and moved on to the next cup. It was a household that knew when to speak and when to question. Father knew best was the mantra of the siblings, enforced by their mother and enforced amongst themselves. Bijan knew this as fully as anyone else. This was not a time to question. But looking across the table at Hasht, at the serving of food he could have held in one hand, and seeing his brother weep silently, Bijan became possessed with anger. He heard himself utter the question that he knew he should not. Why? There was no formality, no grace in his voice, a custom that was expected in this house. It was more bark than spoken word. The question cut through the air like a cold wind, causing some of his siblings to wince. Every eye turned to look at Bijan, to behold the blasphemer. And while Bijan could feel their eyes, he only acknowledged one, his father's. For a moment, Bijan thought he would get no answer, only dismissal from the table. His father's face, stone and devoid, studied Bijan with dark, penetrating eyes. Bijan caught his father's stare and held it for a moment, but only so. Soon, The weight of his father's will was too much, and Bijan looked down at his hands. "Forgive me for my outburst, father," he said. Moments that felt like ages passed before his father answered. Hasht committed a sin against the family. He wasted an entire vessel of milk by dropping it. Bijan thought of the wet dirt he had seen earlier by the homestead entry. He will not be drinking milk today. Bijan looked at his brother, still silent, tears on his red cheeks. He, like the rest of the children, was so very skinny. Bijan thought of Hasht carrying the milk jug, grasping it with a death grip, trying not to spill, and suddenly felt guilty. Why had he not helped his brother earlier? He had seen how much he was struggling. Hasht was too small, too young. He had needed Bijan's help, and Bijan had not given it to him. Guilt washed over Bijan. He needed to make this right. "Surely we can go without seconds so he can have a cup of milk," Bijan protested. "Look at how little there is to eat." "There will be no seconds of milk for anyone," his father answered with surety, "because your brother failed this family." "But the jug is almost as big as he is." Bijan furrowed his brow. It was dangerous territory he was walking into. To defend his sibling was one thing, but to say that his father's judgment was wrong, that was another. Bijan looked to his mother for support, but she only gave him a somber look. He could almost hear her say, "Father knows best." He should stop now. His brother would go hungry today, but what day did any of them not go hungry? To continue to argue would only result in Bijan being punished. There would be nothing good that would come from this. His father had made up his mind, and that was the end of it. Bijan thought of the warrior, his figurine, the branch he had made into his sword. He thought of the imagined enemies he had defeated, all in the name of protecting his family. That was the man he wanted to be, the man who defended his family, the man who would defend his brother. The words came out before he knew what had happened. He shouldn't be given that duty. He is too small. If Bijan's initial question of why had cut through the room like cold air, this took the air out of the space entirely. Time seemed to stop, all noise and movement ceasing. Even the infant, whose feeding noises had been constant, stopped. If Bijan's father were angry, he did not show it. "I do not believe I asked for your opinion, Bijan." And with that, he considered the matter settled. "We may now eat." "No," Bijan blurted. "He's too small, and he won't get any stronger by starving him." The small sands of disobedience had begun falling down the hill of Bijan's mind, pulling and grabbing other bits of grit with them, threatening to start an avalanche. The father was staring at Bijan now, puncturing his skin with black eyes. "You do not know your place, my son. You will cease this foolishness immediately." The earth of Bijan's mind shifted, and the landslide of rebellion was now sliding freely. Bijan stood and pushed his food and cup across the table to Hasht, milk sloshing over the side of his cup. "You do not know your place, father. You are supposed to protect us. You are supposed to provide. But all you are doing is slowly starving us, just like you did to Amir and Suri." Bijan pointed to the empty chairs, trembling, lightning shooting through his veins. He stood in defiance and did not look away from his father's gaze. Never in his existence had Bijan behaved as he was doing now. He had cried, complained, moaned, and questioned in the presence of his father before. Though his father hated it when his son asked why, Bijan would still do it from time to time. He was too willful, and his father would tell him such whenever Bijan had protested or lamented. But never had Bijan attacked his father like this. The boy thought of the time his father had struck Bijan for carrying 2 buckets instead of 4. What level of fury would his father unleash now, accusing him of failure in front of the family. "And what would you have me do?" Bijan's father's voice was flat, cold, a piece of iron that could crack bone and ravage flesh. He sat motionless, his hands resting atop the table, leaning forward ever so slightly. He looked like a great cat, poised to pounce on its prey, face emotionless, but eyes of pure violence. The room was a still painting, and to Bijan, the only thing that existed were those violent eyes. Bijan had thought about this more than once. He had thought about what he would do to save the family, and not in the fanciful way where he fought off and killed imaginary foes from far-off lands. How would he get more food? How could he turn a starving family into a well-fed one? "We hitch the wagon and go south, Father, you and I. There has to be a settlement we can find. We take goats and trade some of them for pigs, cows, seeds, salt. We come back. We plant. We grow." Bijan stuck his chin out, proud. "The wagon is broken, boy. We can fix it." His father looked to the left and to the right, feigning an attempt to search. "With what? And how? Do you know? Please, do tell, boy." Bijan thought carefully, still locking his father's gaze. To not have an answer would be to fail. The two wills were now fully in combat, and the avalanche of rebellion would not let Bijan turn tail. Bijan's mother put a hand on the father's arm. "My love, please." The patriarch pushed her hand away, not taking his eyes off of Bijan. The casual dismissal of her was enough to silence her, and she made no attempt to continue her intervention. Afraid of their father's wrath, Bijan's siblings instead looked at their brother, watching the scene unfold. "We take the mules without the wagon," Bijan said, pausing. "We ride them, and herd the goats we want to sell." "Are we to leave your mother and your brothers and sisters here alone?" His father's eyes gleamed, his expression still flat. "Who will watch the remaining animals? Who will water and tend to the farm? Your brother, who cannot even carry a clay pot from the stables to the home? Your mother, who is tending to your newborn brother? Your sisters, who are all children? Is that what you counsel?" Bijan held his father's gaze but could feel his will faltering, a small well of despair bubbling up from his gut. He did not have an answer. What would the warrior do? The warrior would fight to the ends to protect those he loved. He would jump into the unknown. He would persevere in the face of denial. "Then send me alone. I can do it." His father laughed. After all the denial and rejection his father had given him, this hurt the most. To his father, Bijan was a joke. "No, I think not," his father chuckled, not bothering to explain his reasoning. "We are alone, boy. We must make do with what we have. Perhaps one day a traveler may come by with whom we could palaver and trade. If that day comes, it will be a blessed day, and we can only pray that God sends a traveler with the things we need. But I will not leave my responsibilities here, nor will I send you off on a journey that would lead to tragedy." For the first time since the hostilities started, his father moved. He stood, his tall frame looming large, a giant amongst his subjects. "You want to give Hasht your food? Very well. Your rations are now his." He pointed to the door. "You disappoint me, and I do not wish to look upon you. Leave now and conduct your duties, and God help you if you speak another word or carry out your chores in a poor fashion." Bijan looked to his mother, to his siblings for support. Surely someone would come to his defense. He was trying to defend them, to change their path, to ease the burden of slow starvation. But none came, and at that realization, his will left him. Bijan broke his father's gaze, and without a word, left the homestead. Outside, he put his sandals on and wrapped his scarf around his head. He was defeated, and there was nothing left to do except to see to his duties, to shepherd the family's goats. He filled a water skin and grabbed his pomegranate branch. Properly armed, though he did not feel dangerous in the slightest, he went to the stables and pushed the goats through the fences and out into the desert. And so they traveled into the waste, in search of shrub grass and sustenance, Bijan's only company bleeding goats and his damaged ego. The summer air was still and the sun was at its zenith when Bijan first saw his father in the distance. He looked a desert spirit, the heat shimmering off the land, warping and distorting his figure. As he got closer to the herd, Bijan could see his father was swathed in white linen and silk and carried a large staff. He was an imposing figure, and Bijan wondered what punishment he would receive for his disobedience. It would be some time before his father spoke. They both stood silent in the sun, sentinels looking for danger, the only sound coming from grass being ripped from the earth by the herd. It was an uncomfortable silence, and seemed to Bijan to be the calm before the storm. But when his father finally spoke, there was no yelling, no anger. "Look around you, boy." His father had sidled next to Bijan and was pointing to the dry, baked landscape around them with a large sweep of his staff. "What do you see?" Bijan looked, following his father's staff. Was this a trick? What was his father trying to get at? The boy said what he thought his father wanted him to say, repeating words he had heard the patriarch speak before, shrugging his shoulders as he spoke. "I see grass to feed the animals, great expanses to run the mules. I see the sun above that gives us life. I see a desert floor that hides water underneath. I see everything we need to live and flourish." "I see death," his father said quietly. The word struck Bijan, something he did not expect to hear his father say. This intrigued the boy, for his father always expressed gratefulness. All challenges were spoken in terms of how to overcome, never in complaint or pessimism. His father continued, "Life out here, our life, hangs by a thread every day. When a mistake is made, death will be nearby. What you said earlier at the table, you are right. We are starved. There is not enough food. There are too many to feed." He prodded Bijan's stomach with the butt of his staff. "You think you are doing your brother a kindness by giving him your share. But what happens to this family when you are sick or when you are dead? Who will do the heavy lifting? Your sisters? Hasht? Hamid? I think not. They are not like you. And perhaps that is why you defy me. Because you are strong. Because you are capable. But you are those things in part because of how I raised you, which is the same way I am raising Hasht. And that is the crux of it, boy. Your strength and ability is valuable, yes, but you are part of this family. You have a role to play, and if you step outside that role, things fall apart. That makes you become an enemy of the family, and I will not abide that." With that, Bijan's father walked away, seeing to his duties shepherding the herd. Bijan tried to call out to his father, but the words stuck in his throat. An enemy of the family? But he loved his family, his mother, his brothers and sisters. He loved his father. An enemy of the family? Bijan thought, as tears came unbidden. High noon came and left without incident, father and son guiding and tending to their animal wards, moving from one patch of vegetation to another. As the sun began to descend towards the west, the herd was pushed back towards the farm in silence. No words were exchanged between the father and his son. The sun was sitting lazily above the horizon by the time they arrived, the goats more satiated than their half-starved herders. The mules stood waiting by the fence, gouging the ground and throwing their heads up and down, eager to go back into the fold. They are performing their role, Bijan thought as he opened the gate, pushing the mules and goats through. If they didn't show up every evening to be let back in, it would be trouble finding them. Maybe that is what father means. Maybe I am causing too much trouble when I don't fulfill my role. And my role is to be his son and tend to my duties. Bijan closed the gate alone, his father leaving him to see to the family. The boy hurried to water the animals, his speed driven by hunger. Bijan was always hungry, but having missed his breakfast, his guts were churning. Despite his pace, the sun was touching the western horizon by the time he was done, and he was almost doubled over from the hunger pains. The watering finished, he traveled to the homestead, passing by the pomegranate tree. Sitting under the tree were Hasht and Hamed, both waiting for his return. They cheered when they saw Bijan, running to and hugging their brother. Bijan picked up Hasht and carried him while holding Hamed's hand. Together they walked to the homestead. Bijan, what is that? Hamed pointed south with his free hand. Bijan followed Hamed's finger, past the homestead, towards the road that passed the farm. Though the evening was fully set, heat still pulsed off the hard-baked earth. The land was feverish, distorting any objects that appeared in the distance. Bijan squinted his eyes. Hamed was right. There was something in the distance, though he could not tell what it was. It was on the road, and heading towards the farm. "Come along," Bijan said to his brothers, smiling. "I am hungry. Let us go tell Papa and get some food in our bellies." Both brothers agreed, and they continued along their path. Moments later, they were through the entry of the homestead. The room was a bustle with work, the siblings moving to and fro, Bijan's mother cooking over the oven. The table was being set, and meager helpings of food were being put on the table. Only Bijan's father sat motionless, watching the work being done from the head of the table. When Bijan and his brothers came through the front door, the father turned to look at them. "My sons, you are here." His father beckoned Bijan's younger brothers over to him. "Good. Hasht and Hamed, go and see what your mother needs help with." The father looked at Bijan. "Boy, come and—" Bijan interrupted. "There is someone out there, father, on the road." Bijan's father looked at Bijan for only a moment, and then stood without hesitation. "Prepare for dinner," he announced to the family as he walked to the door. "Bijan and I will be outside for a moment." He motioned to Bijan to follow him. His father stepped outside, putting his sandals on and grabbing his staff. Walking behind the homestead, Bijan and his father looked south. The light was dying as the sun dug deeper into the horizon. The skyline to the west was ablaze, but the surrounding vista was becoming an ever-darkening blue. Against this blackened atmosphere, Bijan could see dark shapes approaching, the same shapes Bijan and his brothers had seen before. They were coming closer, entities on a road that would eventually pass within a stone's throw of the farm. "Father, what is it?" Though Bijan could still feel the tension between him and his father, that strain was precluded by the introduction of the unusual, the abnormal. This road was so rarely traveled, it was a shock to see something moving on it and moving towards them. "Wagons," the patriarch said. Bijan thought of his father's comments earlier. Travelers passing through would be a blessed day. Travelers meant there was a chance to trade, a chance to exchange for things the family desperately needed. That would be more than blessed. It would be a miracle. But this did not feel like a miracle. This felt ominous. Why would God answer their prayers now? Why would he choose this day to send his gifts, so soon after his father had named such a thing a blessing? This was too convenient, a trick a demon or the devil may play on those desperate enough. Bijan strained his eyes. His father was right. He could see wagons, their shapes becoming more palpable the closer they came. 4 wagons, to be precise, heavy and covered in canvas. What was more, There were men walking with the wagons, carrying spears and bundled in robes. The caravan pushed towards them, a harbinger of the unknown, carrying with them mysteries only strangers can bear. And at the front of the pilgrim column, his shape and form shimmering and distorted in the dying heat, rode a great ruin of a man, astride a ruinous horse. An emotion came over Bijan with surprising speed. He was not expecting to feel this way. That he was feeling it now made Bijan feel silly. His mind struggled to calm itself. These were passing men, perhaps merchants, perhaps pilgrims, nothing more. They may stay for the evening, draw water, and maybe even bestow necessities the family needs. But despite the irrationality of it, Bijan could not ignore the feeling that was washing over him in pounding waves, the feeling that made him tremble, the feeling that made his heart race. Bijan, standing next to his father, watching the incoming party, felt fear. This was episode 2 of A Boy and the Pirate Prince, Book 1, a series telling the hero's journey of Bijan and how he met the pirate prince. Join us next episode as we learn how Bijan came into the butcher's service and discover the destination of the caravan's northbound journey.